Living in Montgomery County, the chances are pretty high that you know or work with someone who has come to live in the U.S. from a different country. Many of these immigrants are suffering in silence after escaping from traumatic experiences or just from culture shock. Therefore, this is a show you need to watch. Stay tuned to Connecting Our Community, coming up next. Hi everybody, I'm Karen Allen. Welcome to Connecting Our Community. Today we have licensed psychologist, attorney, and author, Dr. Michael Milgraum. I'm so happy that you have come because you do a lot of really interesting work. Okay, first of all, you're a lawyer and a psychologist, which is a great combination actually. Which came first and why?
Well, I started out as a lawyer. I practiced for about 2 years, 2.5 years. And I found that there was something missing in my life. I wanted something more. I always wanted to go deeper. And so I became interested in psychology, and I got a PhD in psychology. And I always had the feeling that I would somehow combine the two. So now I do in my practice.
They do. They are intertwined because really we're here to talk about immigrants and the work you do with them.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come to get interested in that category of population?
Well, my mother is an immigrant. I think that influenced me, seeing what it's like for a person to transplant themselves into a new society and have to go through all those adjustments. And I think there's always been a part of me that wanted to help people that are struggling, trying to make a new life. And so it naturally flew from that.
Where's your mother from, by the way?
From Romania, originally.
Yeah, because nowadays it's so diversified. I think we have immigrants from so many variety of places. Mm-hmm. And is there any one group that you work with mostly? That you enjoy mostly, or that you need to help, or you find needs the most help?
It's pretty diversified who I work with. In terms of political asylum, it's mostly people from Africa. In terms of other type of immigration cases, I work with a lot of Hispanics. But I've seen people from all over the world, really.
What is your favorite, I guess, category or type of population to work with? Because of you can get deeper into their brains, the psychotherapy part, and what do you take from that yourself?
Well, every culture is unique, and I find every culture interesting. I think I particularly like the work with Africans because I can help them so much, having gone through terrible struggles in their home countries, and many of them being abused in prisons, etc. So, that's I get a lot of fruition from that.
That's good, right? I mean, you enjoy getting to people's heads, but I know it's not just Africa that you do. You work with all kinds, and I'm sure that, I guess, adds to your own cultural base and cultural knowledge.
Sure.
That can then pay it forward to another category.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, what I just said? I think so.
I believe so.
How are psychological reports used in immigration cases?
There are a few ways they're used. one is in a case of political asylum, if someone makes a claim that they've been abused in a prison, then the courts look to see if there's evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder, as there often is. So that's one type of case.
And that's so common, isn't it? Isn't that incredibly common?
It is very common when someone has been through these life-threatening and very demoralizing circumstances that these people have. Other cases are under the Violence Against Women Act, usually women, but it could be men too, people who have been abused, who are here in the country and are relying on someone to sponsor them. They file independently saying there's been abuse, and they can come to me to try to substantiate that there actually is evidence of abuse. And a third category are hardship cases, where someone's facing possible deportation, and the court will consider the hardship to that person's close relative or spouse, a U.S. citizen, close relative or spouse. And I do an evaluation of their psychological makeup to see what the hardship will be.
So really, Dr. Milgraum, a lot is riding on your report.
Oh yes, it can really make or break many of the cases. Yeah.
We're talking about people's lives.
Yes.
To get dramatic, their lives are in your hands. So that means, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is, do you find people trying to manipulate things or in any way?
Yes.
Or because that would be the way to go.
Yeah, well, certainly, and that's the job of a forensic psychologist, to be aware of the very high stakes and that people try to manipulate things, and to use psychological testing techniques that pick up trying to present oneself falsely, looking for different signs of people that they describe certain symptoms, but they don't act in a way that seems consistent with that, really looking for the signs of someone malingering.
It's like it really helps that you're a lawyer and a psychotherapist and a psychologist in this, I mean, for your work, doesn't it? Because
it does.
You can sort of see what doesn't mix and match, as you just said.
Yeah.
And people might want to change their story, or some, you know how in police detective work stories sometimes don't match. I guess you could pinpoint that.
Well, certainly, and it's also helped being an attorney, because many of the attorneys that I work with want me to write my reports in such a way that it addresses the legal issues that are at hand. And since I have experience with that, it comes more naturally to me to do so.
Are there lots like you?
There are some. Of course, it's a long time to get such a dual degree, so
A lot of work.
yeah. So it's somewhat rare, I would say.
Because I don't know that that's something that we know a lot about, because you always see there's an immigration lawyers, there's divorce lawyers, there's estate lawyers, there's all kinds of, you know, business, corporate,
Right.
but we don't often hear about somebody who combines all these things together to help folks in such traumatic need.
Right, right. I don't practice law. I haven't practiced law for 20 years.
But we won't tell anyone. It doesn't matter, because really we're talking about your legal knowledge.
Right, exactly. And I use that in everything that I do as an evaluating psychologist.
What have you learned from these folks? Because they don't have it as good as we do. When I say good, you
yes.
know what I mean. We're struggling too right now with the economy, but we don't, you know, struggling like they're struggling, starting from scratch in a whole new place often, if they were abused or political asylum or whatever.
I can't tell you how many times I've come home and hugged my children and hugged my wife and just felt like, my goodness, we are, with all the problems we have in this country, we have a free country, we still have an affluent country compared to the great majority of the world, and you know, just the ability to conduct our lives in freedom, speak freely, assemble freely for political purposes. You know, thank goodness for that.
Because you see that all the time, I suppose. What do people tell you that when they sit in your office? What are some of the things that people have told you about their lives?
Oh,
that
terrible,
you can share?
Terrible. I see many people from Ethiopia. I'll use that as an example. The regime there is terrible. There is no right, peaceful right to assembly, no right to speak out against the government. Thugs will show up at people's houses. They'll cart them off to jail. They maybe hold them for 3 days. And give them a warning, and then if the person continues, there will be interrogations. There'll be beating during the interrogations. Women get raped in jail. They get demoralized in dirty, crowded conditions. It's basically everything designed to break the spirit. It's terrible stories.
And how do they get from there to here? Because they have to get to your office.
Oh,
they have to get to this country.
There are different ways. You know, sometimes someone was able to obtain a visa, a student visa, a travel visa, something, and they come over here. And then when they arrive, they claim political asylum. Some people, I've heard stories about people coming from South America and from one South American country, all the rest. I hear the geography all the way into Mexico and into here. And some, you know, use some of these people that help people, you know, illegally come into the United States to do so.
That's a scary thought, actually, having to go through that kind of I guess, obstacles.
Yeah.
That's putting it mildly. Obstacles isn't the word, but it's even a worse word than that to get here through all the countries.
And these are desperate people, so they go through all those hardships. Yeah.
As often the border, you know, the Mexican border, all that action going on there, trying to get into the country, they're desperate people too. They will try and keep trying, and you know, it's so sad actually. And of course, there's controversy in this country about those kinds of things. I suppose that you would say that the Africans have it the hardest then, based on what you were saying, or?
Yeah,
if there is such a thing.
I would say so. I mean, they're not only the only regimes that are oppressive, but I think it's also because there's many African people that live in the area where I am, especially the Ethiopians, and I think that's why my population for political asylum is that high from that region.
Right. You mean because where your office is? You mean?
Yeah, my office, and also just the general DC area. It's known as a place where Ethiopians gather.
What are the countries that you would say are the most major human rights offenders?
Well, I've heard terrible stories from countries such as Ethiopia, from Cameroon, Rwanda. Recently heard a terrible one from the Ivory Coast. That's some of them, and as you hear, they're all African.
Yeah, but what about, you know, any from Europe or, you know, just interesting because it's not obviously as bad as Africa, I know.
Yeah, you know, I understand. I saw someone from Azerbaijan that it was an issue of religious persecution. And
not here, there.
Yeah,
right. We have, okay, just making sure.
Right. I've seen some South Americans that are claiming asylum basically because they've been persecuted by drug lords, and saying that it is political asylum because the drug lords are in cahoots with the regimes there. So I get some stories like that.
Yeah, well, the drug lords, that's always a bad thing because they're so violent and ruthless, and
Yes.
they'll stop at nothing.
Yes,
I sometimes can't imagine that in my allegedly sheltered world of us in the States, mostly, of just basic, tax-paying, decent people. It's hard to imagine that those atrocities still go on. It
Yes.
really must change your life to listen to that every day and try to resolve it and help when we ourselves haven't experienced, that kind of horror. I can't even imagine it.
Yes, well, people live in a lot of fear.
What was that? That must be terrible. Anyway, we are going to take a break, but when we come back, actually what I want to talk about with Dr. Milgraum is a couple of things. One is he wrote this book, and I'm going to show you it, and also what is post-traumatic stress disorder, because we've heard a lot about that from our own military here in the country, and it's being diagnosed quite often. So stay with us. Don't go away. We're back.
What could be better than to live in a county with a diversity of cultures? A county where people learn and work together. A county that celebrates life. What could be better? Sharing it all with friends. The Montgomery Channel. Your world, right here at home.
Hi, I'm Merlin Reinecke, Executive Director of Montgomery Community Media. As we welcome in 2011, I hope you'll join me in thinking about all that we've achieved for the community over the past year. Think of our valuable locally produced programs, like our Vote 2010 candidate forums, and 21 This Week, our popular weekly public affairs program. And Think Green, Montgomery County's only environmental series. Think of our many youth media training programs enjoyed by so many teens across the county. Think of the nearly 100 nonprofit organizations that rely on us to inform the community about their important services. Think of what we mean to you. It's easier than ever to show your support with a tax-deductible donation to initiate the next 25 years as Montgomery Community Media. Simply go to our website and click on the Donate button. Any amount makes a difference, and we'll be put to work immediately. Thanks for thinking of us, and thank you for supporting Montgomery Community Media.
We're back with Connecting Our Community. Our guest is Dr. Michael Milgraum. He is an author, he is a psychologist, he is also a lawyer and a psychotherapist. I know that goes with psychologists, but not everybody that's a psychologist actually does psychotherapy, and you do. I want to talk, Dr. Milgraum, about post-traumatic stress disorder, because we certainly know a lot about that in this country. We hear it a lot, and it is really a tough nut to crack. Tell me, first of all, what does the condition look like?
Well, post-traumatic stress disorder has been known about for many years. It was originally called shell shock, and it referred to conditions that occurred in wartime, but it really can occur in response to any life-threatening situation, either life-threatening or a threat to a person's physical integrity, such as potential wounding or rape, or things of that nature. Torture.
Right.
Yeah, right. So there are conditions, chronic conditions, that run along with post-traumatic stress disorder. One is, it's generally known as flashbacks, the inability to get memories of the traumatic experience out of one's mind.
So re-experiencing it.
Right, re-experiencing it, either in terms of conscious memories, or having dreams of it, or having very strong reactions to certain things that remind the person of the trauma. So that's the re-experiencing element.
And that can make a person totally crazy, and I mean that in the most
Right,
horrifying sense of the
right.
word, for the person and his or her family.
It's a constant stressor, it certainly is.
Yeah.
Then there is another aspect of it, and it's really paradoxical, because the person is constantly remembering it and constantly trying to not remember it, to dull the pain and the emotional reaction of that experience. And so they remove themselves from it in various ways. One of the ways they might do it is with withdrawing from social contact, from just withdrawing from normal activities, and something that's called dissociation, which is just kind of not being focused well on anything. The final one is chronic physiological arousal. That involves different signs that the person is in an aroused and stressed state. That can include insomnia, difficulty controlling one's temper, and other signs that the person is really like on the edge of their seat. Like
Irritable.
Yeah, irritable, exactly.
Distracted.
Right.
Wow. That is a lot of, that's a lot, actually. And that wreaks havoc on a person and like I said before, a person's family. And I can't even imagine living with something like that because it kind of never goes away. And I know medication is one area that can actually help, but psychotherapy is another. What actually do you do therapeutically with these survivors of trauma like this?
Well, let me say in regard to medication that the difficulty with medication is choosing the right medication, and with many anti-anxiety medications, and post-traumatic stress disorder is an anxiety medication, many of them are addictive, and that's another difficulty that we deal with.
Slippery slope.
And there is a lot of addictive potential for people with post-traumatic stress disorder, because you have to understand the intensity of the stress and the anxiety is so daunting and is so extreme that the person seeks relief. And that's why many people turn to drug abuse. So anyway, that's why it's good to try to have something else in there, that they're not just relying on medication. And so in terms of therapy, the therapeutic understanding these days is that the person, the condition is really continuing because they're not able to completely connect with it emotionally. It keeps on coming back to their mind, but they're distancing from it emotionally. So what I do over time is, in a safe and comfortable environment, sit with them, encourage them to tell their story, encourage them to talk about their reactions to it, how they're feeling in the moment. And in that supportive environment, they can gradually heal from it so it doesn't have the same reaction inside of them. I also teach them coping strategies such as relaxation exercises and use of exercise and use of social support and different things that can help decrease their stress and increase their coping.
Support groups, right? That could be a big help.
Certainly, especially people who have gone through the same experience. Having that sense of validation, that someone understands you and understands you completely because they've been there, can really change someone's life.
Knowing that you're not the only one.
Yeah.
Well, no matter what it is in this world, actually, for some reason, for good reason, knowing that you're not the only one and that you have that camaraderie with someone, that's got to be a big help too.
Yeah.
What do you find is the time period that it takes to, I don't want to say cure, is there a cure or improve drastically the situation? What do you say?
I believe that someone, once they've gone through a trauma, is always, to some extent, marked in their life. And it doesn't mean they're marked badly. I think they can develop a greater sensitivity to the plight of others, and they have a different impact. They have a different insight into life, so that's fine. But I believe there can be substantial steps towards cure, and a person can return to normal function. It may take time. It may take a year. It may take 2 years. Sometimes it's a combination of time and therapy. But it is a long process, and it takes a lot of devotion on the part of the sufferer.
Yeah, and I guess on the part of the therapist too, because it can be exhausting, I'm sure, to sit there and have people make just very tiny bits of progress each time.
Well, that, and also there is a phenomenon called vicarious traumatization. That's someone that really gets into the emotional world of someone else. Of course, when we see someone being traumatized, you can be vicariously traumatized, but also just getting into their emotional world, hearing them tell their stories, it's hard. It's hard to take in. A person has to deal with their own mental health and their own de-stressing to deal with those sort of things, because that is one of the hardest parts of the job. I appreciate helping people, but it's hard to hear the intensity of some of their stories.
Day after day after day, sure. And I think maybe, I'm sure you feel good when you sort of complete a case where you say, okay, I really helped this person, they can go back out in the world, here's their wings and they can go fly again.
Yeah.
But it does, I guess, take a toll on you too.
Well, yes, there's...
We don't think about the toll that it takes on our shrinks, do we?
There are pluses and minuses in every profession, and perhaps it's a minus, but I get a lot of fruition out of helping people, so that balances it out.
And you have to go home and hug your children and your wife, father of 4 here, so he has. That's why you have so many children, so you never run out. You always, and I'm sure
someone
you have
to hug, right?
Exactly. I can understand that. I know that You are yourself a child of a Holocaust survivor.
Yes, I am.
And that is as a nice Jewish girl myself, who understands as much as I can, because I didn't live in that period, I know that that is in itself a trauma, because many of those people, those parents, refuse to talk about it with their children.
Yeah.
Did you have that situation? What was it like for you?
Yes, for me it was very much. There are different types of survivors, but for my mother really fell within that category of someone that didn't want to talk about it at all, wanted to just throw herself into her new life, into her new experiences, and that was behind her. That was the past she didn't ever want to talk about. So I had to hear things from snippets and put pieces together, and kind of read the emotions. And I guess that's what made me so interested in people psychologically initially. Many children of survivors are, in a way, they're psychologists as children. They want to know more. They are aware of the what's going on inside. Somehow they read it, they take it in, and they try to help. Many children of survivors go into mental health fields.
Interesting. Even though you had to pry it, did you ever pry it out of her at all, or is it eventually? What age did you sort of get something out of her that was substantial?
She would tell snippets even when I was young, but just snippets. And when I was in my later teens, I did question her more, and I got more information. But still, even now, years later, and God bless her, she's in her 80s, she's still well and traveling all over the world.
Good for her.
But yeah, even now, it's sometimes she'll talk, sometimes she won't. It's hard.
It's so obvious, though, that had a huge influence on you becoming who you are and
Yes,
helping other people.
Certainly did.
That's got to be a major thing. I was curious if how do you keep your faith in humanity, actually, considering what reading the papers is one thing, what I read the papers, but you actually have your hands in there, doing hands-on therapy. Well, not hands-on, but that was bad idea, not hands-on, but you know what I mean. How do you really keep the faith when there's so much torture out there?
Well, over the years working as a psychologist, I've worked with more than 1,000 people, and I've seen all sorts of different types of personalities, and some personalities that you might even call morally corrupt. But the truth is, even in those that were morally corrupt, there was some redeeming quality, and I always held on to that redeeming quality to try to pull forth the humanity and the greater sense of hope and steer them to doing something positive in their lives. And since I saw something redeeming in each person I worked with, then it's not such a step to say that there's something redeeming in humanity, because it's just one person by one person by one person. I also think my religious faith helped me with believing in humanity, because I believe that God has a plan for humanity. And because he does, we just have to find it and help people move along towards it. I think that really helps hold me in the course to feeling that there's something positive we can do with this world.
I think being an Orthodox Jew has a lot to do with it, because
Yes.
you do have that faith,
Yes.
and you can find the positive in everyone and not lose hope, which is important. And how would you work otherwise? I mean, you wouldn't be able to do this work, I guess, as well as you do. I want to talk about you as an author real quickly. Never Forget My Soul is a novel by Dr. Michael Milgraum. So he is lawyer, he is psychotherapist, he is also an author. Briefly, the Holocaust touches this book.
Yes, it's an important theme in this book. Let me tell you how it came about. I initially wanted to write a book about group therapy. I love doing group therapy. It's high drama. There's so many personalities that are bouncing off each other in there, and they see in each other, they see their spouse, they see their husband, they see their children, their parents. All these themes come up in the group therapy. And so I started writing this book about group therapy. And there's a lot about group therapy in there, but suddenly the Holocaust started creeping in there. And so I found myself placing 2 children of survivors in this group and other people who had survived from trauma, and asking this question: how does a person move on? How does a person find a positive way of living? How can they trust themselves? How can they trust each other? And how can they trust God again? And that's really what the book is about.
Unbelievable that you actually sat down and wrote a novel too, and of course, with those themes. So good luck with that. And it's called Never Forget My Soul, a novel by Michael M. Milgraum. Okay.
Available on Amazon.
While we're good, no selling on public access. Okay, just let's give some local resources before we go. The American Immigration Lawyers Association, 202-507-7600. That's AILA.org. Catholic Charities, the Immigration Legal Services. There's low-cost immigration assistance there. The Silver Spring phone number is 301-942-1790. The Pro Bono Counseling Project, That's 410-825-1001. Get your pencils, people. Toll free, 877-323-5800. And the Mental Health Association hotline is 301-738-CALL. That's 738-2255. The website is mhamc.org. Now, for more information